All right, okay. So during the last 2 weeks, we discussed about several academic reading strategies, and also after that, we talked about note taking, note taking methods, which are very specific in your stream, which you can utilize when you are attending lectures and also when you are reading research papers. So basically, those were related to academic reading. But today we are going to shift to academic writing from academic reading. So when it comes to academic writing, one of the major components would be formulating thesis statements, because when you engage in research writing, before you start writing anything, whether it is a paragraph, whether it is an essay or whatever, so it can be a research paper, it can be an abstract. So usually when it comes to abstracts, you don't have a paragraph division. That would be just one single paragraph. And when you are writing a journal article or an essay, a critical essay, so these things consist of several paragraphs. And for all of these things, you need thesis statements, whether it is an abstract or an essay. So, first of all, we'll try to understand what is a thesis statement. I'm pretty sure most of you have written thesis statements, so we will do kind of an in-depth analysis or an in-depth engagement regarding this conception of thesis statement. So, first we need to understand what it does specifically, right? What does a thesis statement do? Because basically, what do you understand as a thesis statement? Because you might have already completed your master's, your bachelor's, so you might have engaged in several areas of research. So, what do you understand as a thesis statement before we move to all these scholarly definitions?
I think thesis statement is what you want to say through your thesis.
Yes, Reverend. So that means what you want to claim, right, throughout your essay. That would be your central argument, your central claim, or else you can call it the pivotal, predominant claim that you want to establish throughout your essay. So, a thesis statement, right, going by the word itself, statement, that would state your specific argument. But here we should not get it confused with the topic. It is not just stating your topic. So, most of the time, people do this mistake, right? So, they just try to state their topic specifically. So that point is very important. So it is not your topic, or else you can say it is not merely your topic, right? That would be your central argument or the claim that you want to establish. Because it can guide the reader through your paper's direction, right? It would convey your position to the reader. So when a reader reads your paper or abstract or whatever, he or she should be able to identify your position and why this position matters. So that means you should be able to guide the reader through that direction that you want to take them. So specifically, if we consider your stream Buddhist studies, can be Buddhist culture, can be Buddhist philosophy, whatever, if we consider the umbrella term. So your thesis statement can be based on a doctrinal concept, right? So we have discussed about doctrinal concepts during the last 2 weeks as well, right? So that means how a concept works in a specific tradition. if you consider a specific concept. Let's take meditation, right? How it works in a specific tradition. So then you can base your thesis statement based on a doctrinal concept like that. And also, if you are engaging in a comparative study, right? Then, using your thesis statement, you can compare and contrast traditions, right? Different schools of thoughts, different traditions. So, for instance, you can show the difference between schools of thoughts. For instance, Theravada tradition and Mahayana tradition. You can refer to that in your thesis statement itself. If you are going to engage in a comparative analysis, it is okay to tell that. So you don't have to begin with an introduction. You don't have to begin with the umbrella term, looking at the larger picture, right? The wider scope. Instead of that, you can state that I am going to do this comparative study via your thesis statement itself. And also, it can be about interpretation. If you remember, we discussed about hermeneutics during our first lecture. So, hermeneutics is again about finding out the meanings, exploring the meanings, and it is very specific in your area of study. Hermeneutics becomes very important. So if you're going to interpret a text, if it is revolving around interpretation, it can be a new reading of a classic text. So if you are going to do such a thing, you can convey it via your thesis statement. And also sometimes interpretation can mean kind of a correcting misunderstanding sort of a thing. You can correct a misunderstanding, or if you consider the plural term, misunderstandings, right? Which are existing in this scholarship, right? If you are doing a new reading, if you are correcting misunderstandings, you can mention that in your thesis state. And also, if you are going to evaluate a scholarly debate, right? An existing scholarly debate. So then, if you are going to take the side of one specific set of scholars, if you are taking a side on kind of a contested interpretation, right? Or else if you are going to criticize a scholarly method or a scholarly opinion, then you can state it in your thesis statement. Sometimes people, specifically, when people are at their undergraduate level and even at postgraduate level. So sometimes scholars think, no, we need to provide the basic introduction and then move to our main argument. No, it is not like that. Your thesis statement is like a roadmap. So it kind of throws a light on the journey that you are going to undertake. It throws light on the way that you are going to traverse on, that you are going to walk, right? Yeah. So because of that, it is very important that you very specifically state what is it about, right? So if we move to some of the characteristics of a thesis statement, right? So you have to make a very specific claim which can be argued. And by argued, I'm referring to both for and against. Argued for or argued against. So that means it is not merely a fact. You are not just stating a fact. You are making a specific claim. And that means a thesis can be debatable. So that is okay. So if your thesis statement is strong, then the others also can argue with it, right? So your thesis statement must be debatable in a way. So that means someone could reasonably disagree with your position. Someone can agree and also someone else can disagree. So if someone can disagree means, right? But again, you need to consider the sensibility of it and also the reasonability of it. If someone can reasonably and sensibly agree or disagree with your position, so that means your thesis statement is debatable and therefore it is a strong thesis statement. And also, your claim should be narrow enough. So, what do you understand as narrowing down? You might have your own interpretation about it. We have already discussed about it as well. What do we identify as narrowing down in research?
It should focus a specific area, not the whole areas, and also it should be brief and understandable and clear.
Yes, Reverend. Anything else that someone else would like to add to Reverend's interpretation? Yeah, so as we have only 1 hour, so I'll just move to the explanation. Yeah. So the claim must be narrow enough. That means it should be narrow enough to defend thoroughly within the paper scope. If you are talking about all the things in the world, if your thesis statement covers a very vast scope, right? Then it is not very sensible. Then it is not a strong thesis statement. It should be narrow enough to defend within your paper scope. Otherwise, if your scope is too wide, you are unable to defend your argument, right? You are unable to defend the argument that you bring forth through your thesis statement. And also, you can avoid statements which are universally accepted. That means which are, I would say, very descriptive, right? So, if you are referring to something universally accepted, so that means you are not bringing out something new, something fresh. You are just sticking to some sort of an argument which is already there, right? And also, if it is merely descriptive, if you are not questioning something, if you're not stating something new, so then your research would be almost like stale. Because your thesis statement should invite kind of an intellectual engagement. So it should not invite just simple agreement, right? So then there is no point of doing research. So it should invite intellectual engagement. And also, your thesis statement can be supported with the other evidence. Let's say evidence from other research articles, existing scholarship, academia, and also existing analysis. So that is totally fine. And also, as we discussed here, right? So here we discussed you can evaluate a scholarly debate and also you can interpret a text. You can reinterpret as well. So that means it has to be supported with evidence if you are doing something like that. If you are relating your argument to existing scholarship. So that means you have to, right? So you are bound to take evidence from text. So this is not compulsory. You can write your thesis statement without basing it on the existing scholarship. But also, if you want to refer to some sort of an existing scholarly argument, then of course, you can support your thesis statement with scholarly evidence. And if you are using such scholarly evidence, if you are referring to the existing scholarship, so your thesis statement must be provable through examples, right? So by examples I'm referring to, so it should be provable. So it should not be provable just by your personal opinion. So then it does not have any weight. If it is only provable by your personal opinion, then you cannot call it proving as well. If it is only supported by your personal opinion. So that's why we give this weight to concrete examples. It should be provable not through your personal opinion, but through scholarly evidence. If you are kind of basing your argument on the existing scholarship, if not, it is perfectly fine for you to bring out your own argument. So we have discussed this. So our research should be unique. There's no kind of questioning around that point. But if you are basing your argument on some sort of a scholarly explanation, if you are kind of going against it, if you are questioning it, if so, then there should be evidence, right? Yeah. So this can be textual evidence. You can take direct quotations. So for instance, from sutras and also from commentaries, primary sources, canonical texts, right? And also you can use citations, can be from academic books, can be from journal articles, and also online journal articles, and also expert interpretations. Likewise, you can bring in scholarly evidence. And also, this thesis statement is like the blueprint, right? It is like the blueprint of your research paper. So what do you mean by blueprint? If you're familiar with the term, what does it mean? The blueprint of something. This word is specifically come in research. So blueprint means it is like the major plan, right? The base or the basic plan or the structure of your paper. So your thesis statement is like the blueprint of your research paper. It should guide the reader, right? Through the structure of your entire paper. Your thesis acts as a blueprint for the other paragraphs and sections as well, right? Because when you start with the thesis statement, it should relate to each body paragraph. So that means each body paragraph should advance or support one aspect of your thesis statement, right? Right? So that is very important. So that is very specific. So understanding thesis statement to be the blueprint. It is like this guiding light, right? Yeah. And then if we refer to some of the steps that you can utilize to develop your thesis statement. First of all, you can start with a question. So let's assume that you are writing your thesis or else a research paper, right? Or let's say just a chapter of your thesis. So you can start with a question which genuinely puzzles you about a text, about a topic, right? So then you can base your thesis statement on that question. So that means you are going to answer that question via your chapter, via your thesis, right? Via your research paper. So I remember some of you mentioning that you are going to do research on how mindfulness can be utilized to prevent drug abuse, likewise. So then you are starting with a question. How mindfulness can be utilized? So that genuinely puzzles you about this scope, about this area of study. Then you are starting with that question and trying to answer it. So your thesis statement starts with that. And also, you can engage in research, right? And you can gather evidence. So by engaging in research, I'm referring to, reading primary texts, scholarly sources that they also, we went through Google Scholar, ResearchGate, Academia. You can use all these platforms. And then via reading these primary texts and also scholarly sources, you can understand different perspectives because multiplicity matters. When you gather evidence, you come across multiple perspectives. Then you understand. So there is no one single perspective. And also, it is not just about duality. It is not about having polar opposites, right? So there are multiple interpretations. It is about multiplicity at the end of the day. So likewise, you can understand and you can cater to different perspectives. You can gather evidence from different sources. So after gathering evidence, then you can form your own position based on your research, based on what you studied. Then you can ask yourself, right? As in, what do you think about this? What can you demonstrate? As in, what can you originally demonstrate? Not limiting yourself to the existing research. So you take the key points, you take evidence from the research, you take evidence that is true. But then you have to form your own unique position. You have to posit yourself, you have to postulate yourself as a scholar. And then again, we are coming to the point that we discussed earlier as well, narrowing down. So making it specific again refers to this idea of narrowing down your argument, narrowing down your claim. So you have to narrow your claim to what you can actually prove in your paper, right? What you are going to prove, you have to make it very specific, very special because it should stand out. If you remember, we discussed about research gaps that day, right? So by research gap, we again refer to this idea that we are going to look at a gap in the existing research and then we are going to fill it from our own research, right? And for that, you have to make it very specific. If your topic is very common, right, then you are unable to fill the research gap. So to fill it, it has to be very particular, very specific, highly specific, I would say. Then you can test it. So it is not like scientifically testing it inside a laboratory. If we relate this to your area of study, right? So by testing, we refer to this idea. So you can ask yourself, can someone reasonably disagree? Or can someone reasonably agree? Right? And also, if someone cannot reasonably disagree, it might be a fact, right? It might be a fact rather than an argument. So then you can reconsider and you can again follow the same process, right? So either you can go back to the fourth step and you can make it more specific. You can narrow it down more. Or else you can start from the third phase. So you can form a more unique position because you already have the gathered data, gathered evidence from research. And if you move a step ahead, you can again engage in literature review. You can again read and reread. So rereading is very important here. And also there is this concept of learning and unlearning. Sometimes you have to unlearn what you have learned as well when you are doing a postgraduate because you are coming up with new arguments. Then you may realize, oh, what I thought to be correct is an incorrect. So that can happen. So then you can start with another question, not the question that you are exploring likewise. So you can follow these steps to develop your thesis statement. to make your thesis statement a stronger one. You can repeat these steps as well. So, up to now, if there are questions, you may ask.
So these steps we can use as a guideline, and I think we can also add some other steps according to our specific topics.
Of course, Rebra. Of course. So you don't have to limit yourselves to these steps. So this is like a basic, again, I would say blueprint. This is like a basic foundation that you can utilize. But of course, based on your research topic, based on your study area, you can go for broader arguments. So you can use more steps as well. You can
What
add
is
more
the,
layers to it. Yeah.
what is the difference between the problem statement and the thesis statement?
Right. So when it comes to the problem statement, Mr. Gunawardana, it is specifically revolves around your research problem, right? So when you are referring to your research problem, so there can be a specific research problem, and by problem statement, we refer to the statement of your research problem. But when it comes to the thesis statement, so let me show you an example, then it would be more clear to you. So here, this one is a thesis statement. So this does not involve a problem specifically, a research problem. So here, this is like a basic introduction. So your thesis statement is like a basic introduction to your research or your thesis. So it is more like a very short summary, right? Then you're providing kind of a guiding light towards your thesis, your study, your research. But when it comes to a problem statement, so then you are basing the problem statement on your research question, your major research question. So, whereas the problem statement revolves around your research problem, your thesis statement is much more like an introductory statement which tends to clarify your argument. Is that clear?
Yes. Should we include in the first chapter
Mm.
both thesis statement as well as a problem statement?
So it is like this. So when it comes to a thesis statement, so you can start all the chapters with a thesis statement. So you can start your introduction with a thesis statement, and also when you are engaging in your discussion. So let's say your third chapter and fourth chapter and fifth chapter, those are based on different arguments that you are coming up with. So those come under your discussion. Then for each chapter you can include a thesis statement, and also this applies for your subsections as well. In your subsections also you can start with a thesis statement. But when it comes to your research problem, so usually the research problem comes in the introduction. So you might have as an instructor to submit your research proposal. So your research proposal includes this research problem or the problem statement, and usually it is the proposal which becomes or which is developed into the first chapter of your thesis, and then research problem appears in your first chapter and your research proposal. But when it comes to thesis statement, it is not like your just the first statement, only the first statement which appears only in the introduction. In every chapter you can use a thesis statement. And if you want in subsections also, if you want to develop your subsections in kind of a detailed manner, then you can start your subsections with a specific thesis statement. Then you are going to base your argument upon that. So answering your question again,
Yeah,
yeah.
that means we can start even chapters with these statements. even we can start passages with thesis statement. Is it correct?
Exactly, exactly. You can start subsections, you can start passages. So, and specifically when you start the introduction, when you start a chapter, you can include the thesis statement there. So that would be like the foundation that you are going to develop your argument on. And also when you are starting a subsection, a specific paragraph, then you can start with a thesis statement. But the research problem or the problem statement is different. So it appears in the research proposal or the first chapter.
Problem statement is a part of the structure,
Yeah.
but the thesis statement is not like that. We can come across those statements everywhere, all chapters,
Yes.
all passages.
Everywhere in the sense, yeah, in specific
That means that the thesis
subsections.
statement is a art of writing. It is not a
Part of it is a part of writing, so it is not like that something mandatory that you are going to as in you are not going to mention, so this is my thesis statement, not like that. You have to specifically mention the problem statement, but thesis statement is not like that. It is just a process of writing,
Mm.
right? Yeah.
Problem statement is a structure of the proposal or the thesis.
Exactly. It is a compulsory mandatory part. So it is like you must include the problem statement. So you cannot do your thesis without the research problem or the problem statement. But when it comes to thesis statement, it is much more like a hidden thing. So you are not going to identify, this is my thesis statement, not like that. So you are using it. You are using this concept of thesis statement when you are writing to give more clarity, to add more clarity to your writing.
Okay, madam. Thank you. I
Right,
understood.
right, okay. All right. So then, yeah, we were discussing about some basic steps to develop your thesis statement. And here, when we consider this example, so, what do you think about this one? Is this a strong thesis statement or a weak thesis statement?
Weak thesis statement.
Okay, Reverend. So, why do you think so that this is a weak thesis statement?
Because it is very common and many people have researched on it, and it is nothing special to say.
Exactly, right? So, as Reverend Kusala said, so it is a very common topic. So, if you just type this topic, right? If you just type the keywords, so if you consider the keywords of this topic, it would be emptiness, Shunyata, and also Mahayana and Buddhism. So you can consider these as keywords. If you just type these keywords, so if you just copy this and paste this in Google Scholar or whatever the research database that you are going to do your research on, you will get thousands of studies, thousands of scholarly research papers and journal articles, abstracts, conference proceedings on that. So, on one hand, it is very common. And also, on the other hand, so don't you think that this kind of announces a topic, right? So, that is the first thing we discussed here. So, this should not be your topic. You're not just repeating your topic. Everybody knows your topic. So, it is just mentioned there. So, you don't have to repeat the topic. So, it just announces a fact or a topic. So, there is no argument here. When you say this paper will discuss the concept of emptiness in Mahayana Buddhism, right? So, there's no argument. You're just presenting a fact. But if we move to this one, what about this one? So, here, this writer is kind of specifying here Nagarjuna's concept of emptiness, right? Then you are narrowing down your focus. So there is a specific claim there. Nagarjuna's concept of emptiness. fundamentally challenges, right? And here we can refer to this idea as well. So there is an argument. So it is talking about this challenging process. So what are the interpretations that it challenges, right? So a reference to early Buddhist teaching. So again, you can see it is narrowed down further, not just Buddhist teachings, early Buddhist teachings, right? And also Nagarjuna's concept of emptiness, not just emptiness. If we just consider emptiness or shunyata, so likewise, then you can see, and also if you don't agree with the word as in emptiness, as a direct translation of shunyata, you can argue about that as well. So there is kind of a cultural untranslatability. You cannot use emptiness for shunyata. It does not kind of convey the idea. Likewise, you can argue for and against as well, right? So likewise here you can see there is an argument, right? So this is your own argument. So there is a specific claim, and also this requires evidence. So when you kind of, use something like this, when you use a claim like this, you cannot just argue with your personal opinion because you are referring to Nagarjuna, because you are referring to early Buddhist teachings. So then what happens? Then it requires evidence and also analysis, not only evidence. You cannot just provide evidence and then these are my evidence. So that's it. Goodbye. No, not like that. You need to analyze it as well. You cannot just come up with your claim and then you are just quoting this is scholar and that is scholar A, scholar B. So these are the evidence that I have. So that's it. No, you have to analyze all these evidence and then come up with your unique argument. Otherwise, it would be just a set of references if you don't have your own argument about it. So when you look at this thesis statement, unlike the previous one that we went through, so when you compare and contrast these two, so here you can see, so this is very wide, but here you can see a very specific narrowing down here. And also when you consider keywords, if we just highlight the keywords are also very general, very common, right? You can specifically see only two keywords, right? If you want, you can consider Mahayana and Buddhism as two different keywords, but that does not make much of a difference when we consider the scope, right? Emptiness and Mahayana Buddhism. Or else, if you're going to divide it, emptiness, Mahayana, and Buddhism. So just merely, a very kind of, yeah. But when you consider this one, Nagarjuna's concept. So here you have this one as a keyword, right? And also you can consider this one as one collective keyword, right? And specifically this one also. And also this one. And also this one, not just Buddhist teachings, but also early Buddhist teachings, right? So all these can be identified as keywords, right? And also when you read all these scholarly interpretations which are related to this specific study area, then you would find scholarly interpretations which argue for and against. So you can refer to all these and then base your argument on it. And if we move to this one, how about this one? Is this a good thesis statement?
No, because it's very wider in scope.
Exactly. So it is very wide. And also, don't you think it is kind of vague, kind of odd? And also, something you can also call it obvious, right? Zen Buddhism is different from Theravada Buddhism. So then you are just making a claim, a very vague, very odd, very superficial claim. But when you consider this one, right? While both Zen and Theravada emphasize meditation, Zen's emphasis on sudden enlightenment and Kon practice. So we discussed about Kon practice that day as well. It is like, these witty statements, indirect statements like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Likewise, again, coming inside this Zen practice. It reflects a distinctly Mahayana soteriology. So here you can see that this person, right, this writer is trying to come up with something specific. And even when you consider the keywords, you can see several keywords here, right? So you can refer to different keywords when you engage in the literature review if you are researching this specific topic, right? So here you can see Zen would be one keyword, right? And also Theravada tradition, enlightenment, and you can specify sudden enlightenment as well, and also Kon practice. So you can specifically research about Kon specifically, and then Mahayana, right? And then soteriology, that means this idea of the doctrine or the scholarship, existing scholarship based on salvation, right? So likewise, you can see several keywords here. So that's one way of identifying a good thesis statement as well. So if you have several keywords, if you have a strong argument, so here you can see that it tends to identify specific differences, and also it is trying to cater to the doctrinal significance. Likewise, there you can see. And if we move to this next slide from the example, so we will do some practical activities during the class. So I'm trying to go a bit slow today because one of you requested it is better if we can go a bit slow as well. Yeah. So here, if we move to the scope and the feasibility of the thesis statement, right? The scope matters. So your thesis should match the length and the type of assignment, right? So if we consider a very limited word count, right? So on one hand, limited word count, that can mean that you have only limited evidence. So you have limited evidence that you can present. And also sometimes you can attempt as in at too much results. So because of that, focusing your thesis is very important. So that would allow depth over breadth. So what is the idea here? Giving more room for depth. What is the idea? You're focusing on depth. That means you are not bothering about, as in, the size of your kind of argument, as in your writership. So sometimes it's not about the size. So that doesn't mean you can kind of avoid writing in detail. No. So what matters is the depth that you bring in, right? So that is why when you understand the scope, you can dig deeper and find more depth, I would say. Instead of just holding your argument, just holding your essay, just putting everything that you come across inside your thesis. So it is like citing every scholarly article that you come across. So it is not about that. So sometimes students just cite everything which are related out there. So you have to choose very specifically. You have to read, reread, you have to learn, unlearn, and relearn and identify what is specifically important. So here you have one example. Buddhist conceptions of selfhood across Asian traditions. So is this too broad or too narrow? What is problematic or what is good about this thesis statement?
I think it is in good length and scope because he has narrowed it down to Asian traditions, which means he doesn't focus on Western and other cultures and traditions. Therefore, I think it is in a good length and good scope.
All right, Reverend. Any other
In
ideas?
traditions, it includes many.
Hmm. So you think it
Specifically,
includes many because it says Asian.
Asian traditions.
Hmm.
We don't know what traditions they are
Hmm.
researching on.
Hmm.
That we don't know.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. So there are, you can say, when you consider Buddhist conceptions of selfhood across Asian traditions. So this one is somewhat better than the previous two that we discussed, right? The concept of emptiness in Mahayana Buddhism, better than that, I agree. And also this one, right? Because here it refers to the Buddhist conceptions of selfhood. There you can see some sort of a narrowing down is there. True. So there I agree with Reverend Kusala's argument. So the scope is somewhat narrowed down. But also, right, when you consider Asian traditions, the problem is it can cover multiple countries. So can be India, can be Tibet, China, Japan, right? Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia. And also on the other hand, it can span across more than 2000 years of history, covers multiple countries, right? And also it can include dozens of schools, can be Theravada, can be Zen, Vajrayana, right? Likewise, several schools of thoughts. So because of that, so here we can consider this one not as a very weak statement, right? Also not a very strong one, kind of in the middle ground. Because in a way, when you consider the conceptual framework, conceptually, when you consider the concept, yes. So to an extent, it is narrowed down to the idea of selfhood. That is good. But when you consider the Asian traditions, what has happened? So the scope has become very wider. So here again, you can narrow down the scope. You can make it much more feasible. And also, instead of just saying Buddhist conceptions, right? You can bring in your argument. You can maybe say Nagarjuna's concept or whatever, any concept that you like, which is related to selfhood. Then you can say that this specific concept challenges the interpretations of selfhood in, let's consider the Zen tradition, right? Japanese Zen tradition, likewise, you can narrow it down further. So when we narrow down, when we understand the scope, we need to think of the last possible moment of narrowing down. Until the last possible moment, we can narrow it down. Maybe not only in the title, right? Maybe in your problem statement. Likewise, when you are addressing the research gap, there you can narrow it down as well. And yeah, also if we refer to different types of thesis statements. So here I have mentioned only kind of major types of thesis statements. There are more, you can utilize more, but if we are to get kind of a very wider picture, or else kind of an umbrella sort of picture, one would be textual analysis. So here what you are going to do is you are examining how a particular text works, right? And what does it mean? So that means you are focusing on one particular text, or even can be a passage. You can focus on one specific passage, can be one sutra, can be one commentary, can be one section. And then you can analyze how this particular text communicate its message. And a message can be communicated in different ways. Can be literary techniques, right? A message can be communicated via literary techniques, via literary devices. So for instance, you can take metaphors. So in Jataka stories, you find an unbelievable number of metaphors, literary devices, similes, personifications, right? Several literary techniques. And also you can analyze how the text communicates its message via the structure, right? How the text is structured. And also via language, you can talk about it. And then you can interpret what the text means beyond surface level reading. We talked about this when we were talking about hermeneutics. Yeah. And also you can examine different strategies the author uses to persuade the reader, right? Or to teach the reader. Likewise. Is he trying to force something on the reader, on the scholarship? Or is he kind of bringing out a balanced argument? Likewise, right? When you are analyzing the thesis statements of the other research papers, you can consider all these. And simultaneously, these are important for you to create your own textual analysis, because now it is not only about academic reading, now we have stepped into academic writing as well. So in terms of textual analysis, there you can do that. If you are going to analyze or examine a text, then you can focus on that specific text and then refer to it. You are going to elaborate how you are going to talk about it, right? Inside this thesis, this paper, this paragraph, likewise. And also, if you are kind of engaging in a comparative study, that would be another type of research, just like textual analysis, another way of conducting research. Then you have to compare and contrast two traditions, right? So here, when we talk about comparative studies, here I'm specifically referring to comparing and contrasting two traditions, because otherwise, if we refer to multiple layers, then it would come under multiplicity or multiple interpretations. So at this stage, if you are engaging in a comparative study, comparing two traditions or two texts to show meaningful differences, right? So there you have to place these subjects side by side for analysis. You can highlight the similarities and differences between them. You can argue how these differences reveal something significant about each tradition. And also you can show how comparison deepens, right? Your understanding of both subjects. So you can refer to these when you are writing your thesis statement. And as another type, if we identify historical arguments. So today we will talk about these three types, but when I meet you Saturday, we will go through more types and how to write these statements based on different types. So if we consider the last one that we are going to discuss today, historical arguments, right? So here, if we consider your specific area specifically, so if we refer to as in Buddhist history. So if you want to explain why something happened in Buddhist history or what historical changes meant, as in regarding one specific area, if you want to examine developments over time in Buddhist history, if you want to explain causes and effects of historical changes, to interpret what historical events meant for the development of Buddhism, or else if you want to challenge, right? If you want to challenge a historical interpretation, of course you have room to do that. Or if you want to support kind of an existing scholarly interpretation, right? Then of course you can do that via your thesis statement. So likewise for different types of papers, if your research is a textual analysis, or if your research is a comparative study, or if it is something based on a historical argument. So if you remember, we talked about canonical texts, right? This specific kind of previous and also historical texts related to the doctrine or a particular tradition likewise. So based on the type, you can change your thesis statement as well. So I will be sharing this presentation with you probably next week because I have included some more stuff related to the same topic about this statement and also some questions. And we will do some practical writing exercises, practical writing activities related to thesis statements. And we will base this activity specifically as in on your particular research topic, because that day also we discussed about your specific research topic. So you can do this thesis statement writing based on your own specific research. So instead of just taking one common example, I feel that would be more beneficial for you as well. So we'll do so. And also I will be sharing the previous slideshow, as in the lesson on note taking that we did. I will share it via the WhatsApp group. And this one I will share after the lesson that we are going to do this Saturday. So any questions? Seems there are no questions. So we will talk about more types of papers next Saturday, as in how can you cater to different types of papers, because you are not just engaged in one aspect. I remember some of you are doing textual analysis, some of you are doing comparative studies, and some of you are doing interdisciplinary studies related to law, legal studies, literature, and different areas. So likewise, then we have to cater to different types, and then the way that you have to mold your thesis statement, you have to structure your thesis statement can be different. It can be specifically individual. So sometimes you can stand on a common ground, but sometimes no. Again, that means we have to narrow down, just like I would say, the area of research, the genre of research studies requires us to do. Likewise. So we will cater to those individual components as well. And then we will do further activities. And also we need to talk about integrating secondary sources into thesis statements and what is the roadmap function of thesis statement, and also why sometimes you have to revise your thesis. We'll talk about that in detail as well, and also why you have to be very objective but not subjective, why you have to avoid the biases likewise. And then we will do some practical exercises like this, and also we will cater to your individual thesis statements, right? So if you have no questions, because the time's up, we will call it a day. So good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Okay, good night, man.